Neanderthals were arguably the second most intelligent species to ever walk the Earth. And despite going extinct about 40,000 years ago, their genes live on as they mated with Homo sapiens, the same species that indirectly caused their extinction. As a species, Neanderthals diverged from Homo sapiens around 500,000 years ago. Humans remained in Africa for another 400,000 years, but Neanderthals mostly evolved outside of the ancient continent, developing adaptations that helped them survive brutal European and Asian winters. According to recent studies, modern humans started migrating into Europe and Africa in large numbers around 100,000 years ago. And they shared territory with Neanderthals for several thousand years in small, isolated pockets, ranging from modern-day Russia in the east to Portugal in the west. At the same time, halfway across the world, Melanesians and Aboriginal Australians shared territory with Denisovans, an archaic human species very similar to Neanderthals which reigned over Asia. It's difficult to determine what the reaction of one species was to the other. There was most definitely confusion, as Neanderthals didn't have the same vocal apparatus as humans, and the difference in languages would be much greater than the difference between any modern human languages. On top of that, Neanderthals had a particularly wide brow that was used for social communication, something that humans didn't and still don't have. Despite our differences, our ancestors eventually learned to play nice with Neanderthals. Although humans never lived together with Neanderthals, there have been interactions between the species which were most likely positive in nature, with Neanderthals copying the behavior of their intellectually superior cousins. In this exchange of information and skills, humans and Neanderthals stopped seeing one another as potential threats, and although they never exactly became friends, both species saw a chance for genetic progression in the other. This was masterfully explained by Ludovic Slimak, with the Center of Anthropology and Genomics of Toulouse in France. He says that when two populations are close to one another, but they have different languages and traditions, they are going to exchange women. The purpose behind this is creating a larger, universal clan, which makes survival easier for both groups. This is a universal phenomenon in anthropology, says Slimak, as we see it across different human clans across history, not just with humans and Neanderthals. No single group had the upper hand in this regard. Based on the analysis of Y chromosomes sequenced from remains found in Russia's Altai Mountains, Neanderthal Y chromosomes were more similar to those of modern humans than Denisovans, even though Neanderthals and Denisovans are more closely related to one another than to us. This means that a substantial number of ancestral humans were having sex with female Neanderthals. The ancient interspecies iteration of 50 Shades of Grey is far from over though, as researchers say that the opposite also happened. Plenty of human mitochondria was found in Neanderthal remains in 2017. Human mitochondria, the part of your cell that turns sugar into usable energy, is exclusively passed down from the mother to her children, and human mitochondria in Neanderthals means that they had human mothers. The remains proving this theory are actually the oldest remains proving breeding between archaic and modern humans, dating between 270 and 100,000 years ago in Africa, with the latest remains dating to about 30 to 24,000 years ago in France and Portugal. The remains found in France and Portugal, however, don't imply that Neanderthals lived that long. As I said before, they went extinct around 40,000 years ago. But the remains show a very present admixture of both human and Neanderthal DNA. This implies that the ancestors of those people were the offspring of humans and Neanderthals. The question everyone is interested in is, of course, how did this offspring come to be? What were the sexual habits of ancient humans in comparison to modern humans? And what were the differences between us and Neanderthals? You'd normally think that the saucy details of an interspecies sex story would be lost to history since it happened so long ago. But we actually know a lot based on archaeological findings. One of the theories that can be backed up by evidence is Neanderthals and humans kissing. Laura Weyrich, a Pennsylvania State University anthropologist, found a heap of remains in northwestern Spain, and after examining one of the teeth, she found a microorganism called Methanobrevibacter oralis. This is the same microorganism you can find in your mouth right now, and the finding implies that humans and Neanderthals shared oral companions. We know that not every Neanderthal had this microorganism, which means that one of the ways it could have been possibly transferred is through, well, kissing. It also could have happened through sharing food, but there's no evidence to support the theory of Neanderthals sharing food with humans. Aside from microorganisms, we also shared sexually transmitted diseases. Professor Vilpininoff presented this theory when he noticed an abnormality while studying the human papillomavirus. Papillomaviruses are seen among almost all animal species in existence, and among many strains of it, type 16 is the most common HPV strain in humans. This strain has 5 known types that are mainly defined by their location, and the emergence of these types is what led Pininoff to the conclusion that Neanderthals had something to do with it. People in sub-Saharan Africa are mostly infected with variants AFR1 and AFR2 of HPV-16, with very few instances of the EUR variant infection. This pattern matches the distribution of Neanderthal DNA worldwide. Pininoff further calculated that EUR, standing for the European variant of HPV-16, first emerged between 60 and 120,000 years ago, which is right around the time when modern humans left Africa and came into contact with Neanderthals. This would mean that HPV variant EUR isn't natural, so to say, to humans, but we rather got it from mating with Neanderthals. Based on the way HPV viruses are spread today, Pimenov suspects that the virus wasn't just transferred to humans once, but on many separate occasions. Intriguingly, Pimenov also believes the acquisition of variant EUR from Neanderthals explains why it's so cancerous in humans. Since we first encountered it relatively recently in our history, our immune systems haven't yet evolved to be able to clear the infection. In return, it's highly likely that Neanderthals got herpes from mating with humans. Further research into human and Neanderthal mating revealed that both within their own species and when mixing, Neanderthals and humans were mostly monogamous. Based on genetic code research, scientists found that human and Neanderthal penises are smooth, unlike the vast majority of the animal kingdom. Okay, now what I'm about to say will paint a pretty nasty picture in your head, but most male animals have penile spines, almost identical to those on a cat's tongue. These tiny barbs have evolved to clear out the sperm of competing males, and they're basically only useful for sexual competitiveness in promiscuous species. The lack of these barbs on humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans implies that they were monogamous. Once a Neanderthal male acquired a lifelong female human, they most likely settled with his family. Research suggests that the average Neanderthal household was composed of related men, likely brothers or cousins, and their mates and children. So far, we've seen that human males mating with Neanderthal females has had some success in our species. The opposite, however, being the children of male Neanderthals and female humans, could not survive. We know this because there are some humans today with Neanderthal DNA, but to this day, there are no Neanderthal remains with human DNA. This means that in the areas where they had interbred, the offspring of male Neanderthals and female humans simply could not survive, and was possibly sterile. Because of that, they could not pass the genes on, which is why there are no Neanderthal remains with human DNA. Why human females couldn't have surviving children with Neanderthal males is still unknown. Answering that question will bring us closer to a definite reason behind their extinction. However, we see this inability to create surviving offspring across other species as well. Ligers, for example, are the offspring of a male lion and a tigress, and although they're the largest cat species in the world, all male ligers are sterile and unable to procreate. We can say the same thing for mules, which are the sterile offspring of a male donkey and a female horse. The answer to the question, why were children of male Neanderthals and human females unable to survive, is still unclear. It's possible that the species were incompatible in that regard, and it was impossible for them to procreate over generations. The latter theory is supported by the fact that modern humans quickly rid themselves of long stretches of Neanderthal DNA. The oldest human genomes had fairly long stretches of Neanderthal DNA, but just a few thousand years later, the Neanderthal segments were much shorter. This implies that some people, those with more Neanderthal DNA, had unwanted mutations that we, as a species, wanted to eradicate, or that they were simply less fertile than humans with little Neanderthal DNA. Either way, it's now clear that no matter how you put it, a human Neanderthal hybrid could never survive and procreate. This, however, doesn't mean that we didn't gain anything from mating with Neanderthals. Although humans and Neanderthals are very much alike, there are noticeable differences between the two species. Some of these differences are adaptations that Neanderthals made when they migrated to Eurasia, and as humans started mating with them, we took on some of those features. One of those features are the human leukocyte antigens, which are genes that code proteins to differentiate self and non-self, essentially acting as guards of our immune systems. After migrating from Africa to Europe, immune systems of humans weren't adapted to local diseases, but the immune systems of Neanderthals were. So, by mating with them, we acquired new HLA, which ensured our survival when encountering diseases. Genetic mixing has its downsides though. This immune system adaptation was useful 50 to 100,000 years ago, but the result today is that some people have overactive immune systems that sometimes turn on themselves. So, if you have an autoimmune disease such as Graves' disease or arthritis, you can thank your great times a million grandfather for mating with a female Neanderthal. In fact, it's not the only bad gene we inherited from Neanderthals. In 2020, researchers found that a major genetic risk factor for severe COVID-19 is a perfect match to the Neanderthal genome, which means that a lot of COVID deaths were directly influenced by our Neanderthal ancestry. Are you more sensitive to pain than your friends? It's possible that you're carrying a Neanderthal variant of a sodium channel that causes increased pain, scientists say. Do you know someone that suffers from Dupuytren's disease, the illness that makes your fingers look like this? In 2023, scientists found that a major genetic risk factor is, in fact, inherited from Neanderthals. However, it's not all bad. Humans have also inherited taller noses from Neanderthals. Researchers believe that Neanderthals developed taller noses to acclimate to Europe's colder climates after leaving Africa. And through mating with them, humans inherited one specific genome which contributed to nasal height. The noses modern humans have are designed to regulate the temperature and the humidity of the colder air, while the noses our ancestors had when they lived in Africa were generally smaller as the air in Africa is noticeably warmer. This, however, is just scratching the surface of human and Neanderthal genetics. Most humans have very little or no Neanderthal genetic traits even if they do carry the genes. In fact, almost all modern-day non-Africans have between 1 and 4% of Neanderthal DNA, while Africans, on average, have no Neanderthal DNA as their ancestors never mated with them. There are only a few remains of humans who were hybrids between Homo sapiens sapiens and Neanderthals, and in those remains we can observe what a human Neanderthal hybrid would look like if such a species was able to survive. The most well-known finding is that of the Lapido child, also known as Lagervelo 1. Found in Portugal, the remains of the 4-year-old child led scientists to believe that it had a Neanderthal and a modern human parent, showing features from both sides. The most apparent difference between this child and a modern human is found in its legs, as the child had thicker leg bones, which is in line with Neanderthal anatomy, while humans, by comparison, have thinner femurs and tibias. We also have longer tibias in comparison to our femurs, while this child had a comparably shorter tibia than a human child would. Another set of remains thought to be a result of a human Neanderthal hybrid was found in Pastera Cuasa, a cave in Romania whose name literally translates to the cave with bones. Two interesting sets of remains were found there. The first set, belonging to a man, is called Oasa 1, and it's about 40 to 37,000 years old. After careful analysis, anthropologists concluded that the man has both modern human and Neanderthal features. For one, DNA analysis proves that the man is 6 to 9% Neanderthal in origin, which makes him the person with the highest percentage of Neanderthal DNA in history. On top of that, the orientation of his lower jaw is Neanderthal-like, and his lower jaw is also exceptionally wide, which is another Neanderthal quality. The second set of remains, appropriately named OAS 2, also belong to a man with roughly 6% of his DNA coming from Neanderthals. The most Neanderthal-like feature seen with OAS 2 is a particularly flat skull bone, which was only found in Neanderthals and never in humans. On top of that, OAS 2 had very large teeth, specifically his molars, and even though early humans did have larger teeth than modern humans, their teeth weren't that big. With all of that in mind, researchers agree that OAS 2, just like OAS 1, had both human and Neanderthal ancestors. These remains pose as interesting hypotheses, telling us what a human Neanderthal hybrid could have looked like, but in reality, it's quite possible that breeding with humans killed Neanderthals. Although the precise reason behind Neanderthals' extinction is not completely clear, a paper published in 2022 proposes that being a lover instead of a fighter is the wrong philosophy if you want to keep your species alive. Constantly breeding with humans could have eroded their population, says one of the researchers. You see, unlike humans, Neanderthals never established large populations that could further expand through procreation. Instead, they usually lived within small groups that were scattered across Eurasia. As I said before, a baby with a Neanderthal father and a human mother cannot survive. And by the time these small groups of Neanderthals realized that, they had already given their women to humans in exchange for human women, ultimately leading to a shortage of childbearing women, which eventually killed the entire species. There's plenty of evidence to support this theory, but it still lacks concrete proof and anything to certainly prove it or disprove it. And it will take a long time for us to certainly find out what killed the Neanderthals.